This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, this is Maureen Bogey.
And this is Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to the Creep Street Podcast.
Oh yeah, baby.
That is correct. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We have one hell of an episode, and we are so happy to have you with us.
Oh, yes, yes.
Before we get started, please like, rate, subscribe, tell a friend, review. Anything like that really helps the show. It really helps us a lot. We so appreciate it. We see all of your support, and it truly means the world to us.
Absolutely.
To be kept up on what we're doing, feel free to check us out on Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. We're also on TikTok. We're on Facebook, and on our Facebook, we have a subgroup called Citizens of the Milky Way. It's kind of like just a smaller group where anyone can write and anyone can post, or we post, or it's just kind of a way that we share either fun, spooky articles or funny memes, really lots of different types of things in there. So feel free to check that out on Facebook. It's called Citizens of the Milky Way. Also, if one episode a week is not enough for you...
Oh, quit lying, chump. It's not.
And it's not. And that's okay that it's not, because we have the solution to your problem. And that is at patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast.
Oh, yeah.
On our Patreon page, we have lots of different types of bonus content up there, ranging from movie commentary going all the way up to full bonus episodes and everything in between. We have 3 tiers, $2, $5, and $10 a month, so you can choose whatever is right for you, but no matter what tier you subscribe to, you are going to get some great bonus content every single month. So once again, to check that out, head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast.
Yes.
Now, last week we had a little fun. Because it was the week before St. Patrick's Day.
That's right.
So we went for it with banshees.
Oh, yeah.
Once again, not our dog banshee, but the actual, banshees, screaming banshees. And people have been really enjoying it. Thank you so much for all of your positive feedback.
Oh,
People
yes.
who are listening, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. So glad that you did, because it sounds like you have.
Absolutely.
This week we have something a little different.
Oh, yeah.
Going down a different alley on Creep Street.
Yes.
Dylan, what the F is going on? What are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about phantom phone calls. And really quick, let me give you my sources. Phantom Phone Calls from Beyond the Grave by Brent Swanser at Mysterious Universe. Phone Calls from the Dead by Tony Walker at Medium.com. And a video from the YouTube channel Epic Paranormal TV. Now, as you might have surmised from the title, this is about ghosts that make house calls.
Yeah.
Phantom phone calls, obviously a fascinating part of the paranormal. Some may say that this phenomenon falls into the category of EVP, which in a way it does.
Right, and we've done an episode on EVPs.
Yes.
Shout out to that episode. Feel free to check that out.
But I believe what separates the two is the matter of intention. Typically, when an EVP is captured, the person was typically trying to make contact with a spirit by asking it to interact. Mm-hmm. Phantom phone calls are just the opposite. In these cases, spirits actively use our technology to communicate with us. Like, I know they do that with EVPs, but they're the ones making the effort.
Reaching out.
Yes. As you can imagine, there's quite a rich history of phantom phone calls. The first real comprehensive study of phantom calls was published in 1979 by parapsychologists D. Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayless. The book was titled Phone Calls from the Dead, and just a strange little side note, Rogo was actually murdered in 1990, and the killer was never caught.
Oh, that is weird.
Unrelated probably to this, but just an interesting little fact.
But spooky.
The other author, though, Bayless, however, he lived till the age of 84, passed away of natural causes in Los Angeles in 2004, so it might have just been an awful coincidence. Now, this is one of those where you kind of just gotta dive right into it.
You gotta just go in, get your feet wet, get your DICK wet.
That's right.
And you gotta love it. You gotta live for it.
That's right. The title is kind of self-explanatory, phantom phone calls. There's not really a lot we need to set up.
Right, you get it.
What we are going to do is, at the end, we're going to break down types of phantom phone calls and theories and whatnot, but really, they're pretty easy to understand.
Yes.
So we're just going to start diving into some of these freaky-ass stories. We even got some audio for you. Freaky, freaky stuff. Well, one of the most famous cases of phantom calls actually happened to acclaimed author Dean Koontz.
Oh, really?
Koontz, considered to be a master of suspense, he's sold hundreds of millions of books worldwide. He first told of his experience with phantom calls to autobiographer Katherine Ramsland. As Koontz tells it, one day he received a call at home, but the number shown was unlisted. He answered the phone and says he could hear the voice of a woman, but that it sounded like it was far away. While he couldn't really understand her well, he says there was definitely a sense of urgency in her voice. And one of the few things he could make out that she seemed to be saying was, "Please be careful." Now, of course, Koontz asked the woman who she was, but she seemed to ignore his questions and even seemed unable to really hear him at all. She repeated her statement 3 more times, "Please be careful." Each time the voice faded, seeming to move further and further away until it was completely gone and he was left just listening to an empty line. What's weird, though, is Koontz said the woman on the phone sounded just like his mother, who had passed away 20 years earlier.
Wow.
Well, 2 days later, Dean Koontz, he made a trip to go visit his father. His father, I guess, was staying in a mental health facility. The source doesn't specify his ailment, but only states that it was behavioral issues. He entered the facility and made his way to his father's room, but as he walked through the door, his father lunged at him, wielding a small knife. Koontz was able to grapple with his father and eventually wrestle the knife away from him. Well, during the commotion, police had been called to the facility, and, finally he's able to wrestle this knife away, and he stepped out of his father's room holding the weapon. And there, coming up the hall, were police. And seeing this man with a knife,
oh no,
they pulled their guns and held him at gunpoint and demanded he drop his weapon, otherwise they would shoot. And, after a moment of shock, he obviously dropped the knife, and the situation was resolved, but looking back, he wonders if that call was from his mother warning him about the incident, saying, "Your dad's not doing well, please be careful so you don't get hurt either by that knife or by police."
Right. Wow. And the fact that it really did sound like his mother's voice, too, is interesting. It's not just he thought that maybe he could put the 2 and 2 together from the message. It's like, no, it actually sounded like her, too.
Right. And this is obviously a very well-known individual, a world-renowned author and everything. So, yeah, pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. Well, back in the late 1960s, there was a rock musician named Carl Uphoff. He had an experience with phantom calls. Uphoff had been very close to his grandmother, and she would often call him, and when she didn't get him, she would even call his bandmates to ask for him. Now, the funny thing about this was she was actually deaf and couldn't hear their responses.
Oh.
So, but it was still sweet. She would call him every night.
Oh, I see.
She was alive at this time.
Yeah, I was so confused. Oh, yes.
In life, yeah, she was deaf, but she would still call him every night, even though she was deaf and couldn't even tell.
Oh.
Nevertheless, this never stopped her from calling. Well, eventually, Upoff's grandmother would pass away. And just 2 days later, and this is in 1969, just 2 days after her death, he was out with some friends when he received a call. And the voice on the other end of the line was, without a doubt, his grandmother. And for a moment, he stood there in disbelief and then asked her how it was possible she was calling him as she was dead. And right then, she hung up the phone. Now, the calls would continue over the next several days, and each time he would ask his grandmother how she was able to call him, and each time she would hang up the phone. This went on for a while, and then one day, the calls just stopped altogether.
Wow.
It was like a habit of calling every night that it was like almost like a residual haunting in a way.
Right.
And because it was almost like he said, like she could, well, one, she was deaf. It's almost like she was repeating this thing, consciously or not, was repeating that action over and over.
Wow.
Right.
That's cool. I like that. That's kind of a sweet one.
It is, very sweet. Well, another case that happened around the same time in the late 60s happened to a woman named Seema Lieberman. Seema had recently met and fallen in love with a man named Johnny, and the two even moved in together. Everything was going great for them. And then one day, Seema was at the house alone when she received a bizarre call from Johnny. There was disruption on the line, and for some reason the call was very staticky, and she was having trouble understanding what he was trying to say. One thing was for sure, though, it was Johnny, and in his voice there was definitely a sense of urgency. She wasn't able to understand much of what he was saying, but one thing did come through clear. Apparently, Johnny said to her, "I just want you to know that I love you, and I'll never be mean to anybody again." But when she asked him what was wrong, the line suddenly went dead. Seema immediately tried calling Johnny back, and she did several times, but each time she only got a dial tone. 2 days later, Johnny's mother called her and broke the awful news that 2 nights earlier, Johnny was shot dead while sitting in his car.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, baby. But wow, that is crazy.
So what did Johnny mean by "I'll never be mean"? Part of me wonders if he was involved in something she didn't know about, like organized crime.
Yeah.
Because he got shot, and maybe there were people out looking for him, or maybe he had gambling. Who knows? I'll never be mean to anyone again.
I don't know. Or maybe was he mean to people in life at some point? And I don't know.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, that is weird.
Now, this next story is also one of the more well-known cases of phantom calls. And this happened in 1994 to a man named George Meek, who actually worked as a paranormal researcher. And according to him, one night he received a phantom call from his old investigative partner, a man named Konstantin Raudiv. These two had made a name for themselves with their EVP work, which we know what EVPs are.
Right.
You know, apparently many of the EVPs they captured are said to be some of the best ever. But here's the thing. Meeks' partner had died 20 years earlier in 1974. Why is he calling him in 1994?
Right.
And he even got emails and even some faxes, apparently.
Faxes?
The source made an excellent point here, which I thought was actually really interesting and kind of astute. Doesn't it make sense that someone who in life dedicated so much time to using technology to communicate with the dead is apparently very good at doing it once he's passed away?
Yes, it does make sense. And it's funny, I was thinking that too when you first started describing this story, where it almost seems too good to be true. Like, oh, of course, a paranormal investigator has an experience like this.
Right.
But at the same time, it does make sense, though, because, first of all, for the living person, they are aware of these phenomenons and are open to it.
Right.
And know how to receive it. And then on the other side, the investigator that had passed away had spent their life trying to connect with people, so it makes sense that they would be able to, or at least know what channels to try to communicate with. It just kind of makes sense.
It does make sense. Who knows if it's related or not, but I thought the source made an excellent point pointing that out, that like it would make sense that if you were to keep your skills and know-all into the next life, he would kind of know how to get that shit done on the other end, you know.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Well, George Meek claimed that he was able to record one of these phone calls. And I'm going to play for you the entire call. It's 1 minute and 24 seconds.
Okay.
It's very fascinating, and we will discuss it hereafter, but have a listen.
Morning, this is George Meek.
This is Konstantin Raudiver. George, my friend, at last we succeeded in contacting you. Jeanette is beside me, and she wants to give you all her love. This is Konstantin Raudiver. This is the first contact you get from us. I suppose that you can hear me.
I can hear you very well, very plainly.
Fine, so this is the beginning of a new story, a new chapter, George. You are a very good friend of ours, even if we haven't met. We will continue this. This is the first bridge we succeeded to build to the States. Mark was contacted, and I must interrupt now.
Thank you, dear friend. You may not be able to hear me, but I want to take this occasion to say...
Now, let's address something right up front.
Yeah.
Constantine sounded a lot like the Emperor from Star Wars.
Yeah. Very, I was thinking more kind of like Dracula-ish.
Right. I'm saving a little bit for later because we're going to talk about this whole, like, why would he sound like this, like,
Yes.
George, finally, we have made... There's explanations later and theories why that might be that are very fascinating, and we'll get into that. But I just think that was so interesting. It's very cartoony in a way.
Yes.
You know, he's saying, from what I can understand, it was, George, thank you, my friend, for reaching out. This is the beginning of a new chapter, whatever. Pretty eloquent, really.
Right. It's not just like little flashes of words here and there. It's like these are full sentences.
And if you notice, now I don't know if that's just where the recording stopped, but at the very, very end, you hear George go, thank you, my friend, and let me take this time to say beep.
Yeah. And it just ends.
And that's another thing we're going to talk about is the hanging up part when you try to interact.
Right.
I just think it sounds like he got fucking hung up on because it comes right now. Granted, that just might be where the clip ended.
Yeah, but it sounds so funny.
And later, when we talk about that monotonous voice, I'll play that, not the whole clip, but I'll play just a little chunk of it again, and maybe we'll see it in a different way.
Okay.
Well, this next case also happened in the 90s. Happened to a woman named Betty who had recently started a new job at her office. And on this particular day, it was around lunchtime, and many of her co-workers were out to eat, and she was alone at the office. Betty was busy with work when one of the phones on her co-worker's desk happened to ring, and she was just kind of distracted by work, and she ended up answering the phone even though it wasn't hers. And when she did, she heard a man's voice on the other end of the line. At first, he asked for a name that Betty didn't recognize, but then he apologized, corrected himself, and asked for Mary, and Mary happened to be the woman whose phone he had called. This was Mary's desk.
Right.
So Betty explained that Mary was out to lunch and would be back soon, and asked if he would like her to take a message, and he said, "Can you tell her this is her brother? I really missed her at the family gathering, and I wish she had gone." Well, Mary returned back from lunch, and Betty relayed to her the message. And whatever it was, this message shocked Mary, and she apparently ran off crying.
Oh.
Betty was obviously mortified that she had done something wrong, and another co-worker explained to her that 5 years earlier, Mary's brother had died in a car accident. And just 2 weeks before his death, they had apparently had a family reunion, but Mary was unable to attend because her husband was in poor health.
Oh.
And here's a little cherry on top that was fascinating. Because remember, at first he asked for someone she didn't know, and then he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mary." Apparently, Mary's brother had a nickname for her, and that first name he asked for was the nickname he called her by. So it's just like an extra staple of like, oh, wow.
Wow.
Because at first you might think, well, is he just prank calling or something.
But it's just another extra layer of familiarity there.
He had referenced this nickname that she hadn't been calling, in years.
Wow, that's scary.
I know, right? That's pretty dang freaky.
Wow. And that's one is interesting because that one, they really were able to have like a back and forth conversation.
Right, absolutely. So now we get into some more recent instances of phantom phone calls.
Oh, please.
This one happened in 2003 to a man named Frank Jones in the city of Blackpool, UK. Jones had recently lost his wife Sadie, who died of a heart attack. She always had her phone with her in life, and the family thought it was only fitting to have her cell phone buried with her, which they did.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Almost instantly, the strangeness began. The family began to receive unexplainable calls and texts from Sadie's phone. One time in particular, and this one's pretty freaky, Frank Jones was out and about when he received a call on his cell phone, but the number calling wasn't Sadie's cell phone. It was calling from his own home phone. And this obviously put Frank on alert because as far as he knew, there was no one else at the house, or at least there shouldn't be. So he rushed right home, only to find the house empty, still locked up. But there was the lingering smell of cigarettes. And Frank himself was not a smoker, but Sadie was. And on top of that, Frank could also smell the perfume that Sadie always wore in life. Something also to know was apparently this was not Frank's first experience with the paranormal. Apparently that house that the family lived in there in Blackpool was known to be haunted, and the source says that the family that lived there before them had even been run off by the sinister activity.
Wow.
Leading up to Sadie's death, the family had apparently been plagued by all sorts of things, furniture being thrown around, footsteps, slamming doors, bedclothes being ripped off of beds, even clothes being torn off of people's bodies. The family had nicknamed this entity as The Thing, but it got so bad the family even had the house exorcised. So keep in mind, this was before Sadie died.
Yeah,
They had this shit's going on in the house. 5 years later, Frank and Sadie tragically lost their son, who died of a brain tumor. He was only 32.
Oh, God.
And only 3 months after that was when Sadie died. So the question is, was this Sadie, or was this a malevolent entity pretending to be Sadie?
Oh, interesting. Because it seems like there was a lot of activity at the home that wasn't just... At first I thought that maybe it was just kind of like you were saying, like benign activity happening in the house.
Right.
But if it was so bad that it chased a family away, yikes, yeah, that's rough.
Right. Very freaky. And we'll circle back to that because when we start going over theories, we'll touch back on that.
Okay.
The next incident is apparently also one of the more well-known cases of phantom calls. This happened in 2008 in Los Angeles. On September 12th of that year, there was an awful accident involving a Metrolink commuter train. Now, as the train was traveling through the Chatworth area of Los Angeles, it crashed into a freight train, killing 25 people on board.
Oof.
One of these victims was a 49-year-old man named Charles Peck. Within the next few hours after the accident, Peck's phone somehow made 35 calls in total to various family, friends, and loved ones. His fiancée, sister, son, and stepmother had all answered the phone only to hear static on the other end of the line. And when they tried to call him back, all they got was his voicemail. Here's the thing. It was the signal from Peck's phone that led rescuers to the body. It was determined that he had died on impact. Yet over the course of 11 hours after that accident, those 35 calls were made. One was made just an hour before the body was found.
Wow.
Here's what's extra wild about this. While the rescuers were able to find Peck's body, they were never able to find his phone. Yet it made all those calls.
Oh, that's so weird.
I know, right?
I mean, where could that phone possibly have gone unless it like just completely was demolished? But then how did those calls get made?
Right.
Wow, that's fascinating. And interesting, too, that it was those calls that actually led to the bodies being discovered as well.
Right. Well, wouldn't you know it? The dead can apparently send emails as well, as we said with George Meek's case.
Oh, yeah?
Such a thing happened in 2011 when a 32-year-old named Jack Voorhees passed away with heart arrhythmia. This was such an awful loss considering the man was so young. The strangeness began 5 months after his death when his friend, a man named Tim Hart, received an email from Jack one night. Not only was it strange he was getting an email from his deceased friend, the contents of the email were quite chilling. The email subject line simply read, "I'm watching."
Oh, come on.
The body of the email was just as ominous. It apparently read, "Did you hear me? I'm at your house. Clean your fucking attic."
What?
This was quite odd, as not long before Jack's death, he had been over at Tim's house, and they were up in the attic contemplating what they were going to do with all the space up there. But Hart wasn't alone. Jack's cousin Jimmy McGraw claimed to have gotten an email from him as well. Jimmy had recently gotten into an accident and broke his ankle. A week after that, Jimmy got an email from Jack that read, "I knew you were going to break your ankle. Tried to warn you. Gotta be careful."
Huh. So 2 different emails.
2 different emails, and it's like, first of all, making the subject line, "I'm watching," nice touch if all you want him to do is clean up.
Yeah, right.
Jesus Christ.
But I mean, it's an eye catcher. It'll get your attention, that's for damn sure.
It'll get your dang attention, you know what I mean?
I mean, I wonder what that really is all about. Is it trying to scare him, or is that actually just letting him know that maybe he's in the ether and can see what he does or something? I don't know.
Right, that's an excellent point. Now I'm going to play for you a little more audio here. So I got this from a YouTube channel called Epic Paranormal TV, and I guess a subscriber to that channel had sent the host a recording she had gotten of one of these phantom phone calls.
Wow.
And in fact, she got this call, and it lasted so long she was able to go get her laptop and record it. Now, keep in mind, how she recorded this was she literally just put her phone on speaker and placed it next to the laptop.
Right.
But the guy from this YouTube channel, I think he enhanced the audio and everything, so you'll be able to hear some stuff. Now, this is going to sound more like an EVP, where some things are hard to understand, but we will read to you what apparently some of the things this thing was saying to this woman.
Okay.
And here we go. So, some of the things it's apparently saying is, I'm guessing this woman's named Patty, because it apparently one time said, Patty.
Mm-hmm.
But then it said something like, "I now can peek through walls." And also something about, "Mama, I want it dead," or something, and kill it. You know, granted, this is what they are interpreting it to be saying.
Right.
Yeah, so some pretty freaky stuff there.
Seeing I can peer through walls. That's weird.
Yeah, very strange. So now let's go over some of the similarities between these phantom calls.
Okay.
Now, obviously, there's no hard and fast rule, and there's plenty of reported phantom calls that break from this criteria. But nevertheless, these are the similarities that are seen more often than not. First of all, the calls usually happen within 48 hours of the person's death. Obviously, this isn't always the case, as some of our stories we've already talked about differ from that, but it's usually pretty quick after their time of death. Sometimes it's even before the loved ones know that they're deceased.
Right. I found that interesting. I noticed that.
And most obviously, it's someone typically they are close to, whether it's family, friend, all that. But here's the other thing that seems to be almost universal with these calls. They're usually very repetitive, with the person on the line repeating the same thing over and over until the line suddenly goes dead. They're often incoherent and hard to hear because of static or something, or they'll seem distant, like they're coming from another room. Now, while most of the message may be incoherent, certain things will come through clear. Common things reported that are said on these phantom calls are things such as being cold, or taking a trip, or oftentimes saying goodbye or saying something reassuring like they love you, etc. Oftentimes when the living person tries to question the phantom voice, they're either met with silence or the line goes dead. And overall, these calls tend to be short. And this was an interesting point the source made, and I just wanted to quote it directly. The calls that do seem to last longer and have more interaction are the cases in which the person does not realize they are talking with someone who has died, although why this should prolong the connection remains unclear. So in those cases, when they are longer, typically the person doesn't know they're talking to a dead person.
Right.
They're short when they do know that they're talking to a dead person. Now, you'll remember at the beginning, I said one of the first real comprehensive studies into the phenomenon of phantom calls was the book Phone Calls from the Dead, published in 1979 by Scott DeRogo and Raymond Bayless. Remember? And then Rogo ended up being murdered.
Yeah.
And then, now about that book, something they attempted to do with their book was to break down the phenomenon of phantom calls into two separate categories. First, there's what they referred to as intention cases. These are calls in which there seems to be an urgent message or warning that they need to get across to the living. Sometimes the call will seem normal at first, and only later will the person who received the call find out who they thought they were talking to never called them at all. It would seem that something was imitating the voice of someone they know. In many of these types of cases, the voice on the phone will seem strange, sometimes as if the person is drunk or even mechanical. The source actually makes a great point at highlighting the similarities between these calls and the accounts of when the Mothman or Men in Black have called folks, like they're trying to sound human or something.
Oh, interesting.
So let's real quick re-listen to a quick segment of that first phone call that we listened to between George Meek and his friend Constantine.
Morning, this is George Meek.
This is Constantine Rowden. George, my friend, at last we succeeded in contacting you. Jeanette is beside me, and she wants to give you all her love.
Now, I don't know for certain, but there was nothing to indicate that that's how Constantine talked when he was alive.
Right.
Is this something pretending to be him, something pretending to sound human?
Like something that is only heard human voices on TV or in movies or something.
Right, and is trying to imitate how that person would talk, and it
Right.
just sounds really weird and off and mechanical,
Yes.
as they say.
Oh, that's an interesting theory. I like that.
Yeah, well, there's actually an interesting story surrounding what they call these intention calls. And it centers around a psychic medium named Reverend Carl Hewitt. And he told this story in a book he published called A Medium's Diary. And in it, he tells the story of something that happened to him in the 1970s. This call was from a man named Robert, who asked to book an appointment with the medium for a regular reading. And while this request was very normal, something about the call seemed strange to Hewitt, and later when his secretary asked him what was so strange about it, he said, it didn't sound like a human voice. Well, it only gets stranger. The day before the appointment, Hewitt's secretary called this Robert just to confirm that the appointment was still on. Robert had no idea what the secretary was talking about and actually got furious because he didn't believe in this quote-unquote nonsense. But for some reason, though, Robert still attended the appointment. And Robert was still angry when he got there, probably planning to give Hewitt an earful. Now, as Hewitt was getting chewed out by this man, he saw a boy standing behind Robert. And this boy was clearly a spirit. It was clearly someone no one else could see. And when Robert finally calmed down, Hewitt relayed to him a message from that boy whose name was apparently Fred. And Fred was Robert's son, who had died. Robert had thought it was suicide, but Fred wanted to let his father know he did not take his own life. So here's this man who didn't believe in this stuff, but is apparently, we're to assume, the spirit of his child so desperately wanted his father to know he didn't take his life,
Right.
that he reached out to a medium imitating his father's voice. And you can understand, like, I'm sure his grief is raw, so when he gets a call from a medium or a psychic,
Right,
he probably
he's
thinks,
just-
oh, here's someone trying to manipulate me out of my, and was
Right.
probably going to chew him out. And then he ended up seeing this boy, Fred.
Wow, what a story.
How wild is that? And the second category is termed answer cases. And these seem to be more like, a lot like the ones we've talked about today. A person will be on a phone call with someone only to find out later that the person was dead before they even made the call. But yeah, very, very interesting stuff. But I'm fascinated by this idea of something imitating, like Men in Black or Mothman.
Yeah, that's just very bizarre.
Like that voice of George Meek's friend Constantine, that weird grumble.
Yes.
It's like, surely, I can't imagine he really had a voice like that.
I mean,
when
I
he was
wouldn't
alive.
think so. I mean, I don't know. Right. It's just like so bizarre and such an interesting theory. That's something I hadn't ever heard before, but
Right.
I could see that making sense.
Absolutely. All right, Maureen. Well, that is going to wrap it up for Phantom Phone Call.
Dylan, thank you so much for doing all of that fantastic research. We so appreciate all your hard work, and what a fascinating episode we have had today.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. And let me give a phantom call to some of our phantom freaks.
Oh, please do, baby.
All right, Creep Street. The names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth, and the Evil Elizabeth Riley.
Damn, those are some good names. And Dylan, thank you so much for reading them off so damn well.
Absolutely, of course. If you want more, you just go to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast.
That's right. Please also remember, just another reminder, to like, rate, subscribe, leave a review, tell a friend, tell a family member, post about us on social media, anything like that to spread the good word of Creep Street. It really helps us out, and we very much appreciate all that you do for us.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.